Welcome to a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Today, our episode is about myths and legends, and we will talk today about Greek myths. We will talk about Greek myths in general. We will talk about how everything began according to Greek mythology, and we will talk about the gods of Olympus. We will also talk about the gods of the sea and the underworld. We're talking about here Hades and Poseidon, of course. We will also talk about the Trojan War, some monsters and heroes from Greek mythology, and Greek myths in history. So we have quite a few things to talk about in this new episode from English Plus Podcast. So without further ado, let's start talking about Greek myths. The ancient Greeks had many myths or stories about gods and heroes. These gods and heroes acted very much like human beings, though on a grander scale. They fell in love and they quarreled. Myths try to explain things. Some myths are stories about how the universe, the world, and human beings were created. Other myths offer explanations for why such things as war, earthquakes, and floods happen. Myths are such great stories that they get told over and over. We still read the Greek myths today. Now let's talk about how everything began. According to Greek myths, there was nothing but emptiness at first. Then came Gaia, the earth, who gave birth to Uranus, god of the heavens. Gaia and Uranus had 12 children called Titans. Uranus was afraid that the Titans would take his power. He was right to be afraid. The youngest Titan, Cronus, killed his father. Cronus then tried to kill his own children by swallowing them. He did not succeed. His youngest child, Zeus, overcame Cronus and helped the other children to escape. Zeus's brothers were the gods Poseidon and Hades, and his sisters were the goddesses Hera, Demeter, and Hestia. Now the gods of Olympus, the new gods, the children of Cronos, were known as the Olympians because their home was on Mount Olympus. Zeus was king of the gods. Hera was his queen. Zeus's children included the twins Artemis, goddess of hunting, and the sun god Apollo. Zeus was also father of the three fates, who controlled human life and decided when people should die. Even Zeus could not make them change their decisions. Now, what about the gods of the sea and the underworld? Not all the gods lived on Mount Olympus. Poseidon had his own kingdom of the sea. Sailors had to be careful not to offend him. If angry, he might start a storm. Hades ruled the underworld, a place beneath earth where the souls of the dead go. Hades kidnapped Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, goddess of grain. Demeter was too busy searching for her child to look after the harvest, and people began to starve. Zeus ordered Hades to let Persephone go, but she had eaten a little of Hades' food. Because of that, she had to spend part of every year in the underworld. When Persephone is with Hades, it is winter on earth and nothing grows. When she returns, spring comes with her. There are different versions of this myth and of other Greek myths, but most of the stories give the same picture of the Greek gods. The gods were passionate and often fought with each other. They also took part in human battles. And here we come to talk about the Trojan War. The Trojan War was a major event in Greek mythology. The Greeks may actually have fought the Trojans in a long war. Myths that have a basis in history are sometimes called legends. According to Greek legend, a Trojan prince named Paris was asked to decide which goddess was most beautiful, Hera, Athena, or Aphrodite. Paris chose Aphrodite. She gave him the lovely Helen as a reward. Helen was already married to a Greek prince. When Paris ran away with Helen, the Greeks declared war on Troy, where the Trojans lived. The fighting lasted 10 years until Athena helped the Greeks to build a giant wooden horse. The Trojans took the horse within their strong city walls without realizing that Greek soldiers were hiding inside it. At night, these soldiers came out of the horse, they opened the gates to Troy and let the rest of the Greek army inside to destroy the city. A long poem, the Iliad, describes the Trojan War. A second poem, the Odyssey, tells the adventures of the Greek hero Odysseus after the war was over. The writer of both poems is supposed to be Homer. a poet who probably lives around the 8th century BC. However, the legends are much older than that. Greek storytellers passed on the tales for hundreds of years before they were written down. Now let's talk about some monsters and heroes from Greek mythology. Some creatures in Greek myths were terrifying beasts. The Hydra was a monster with many heads. Other creatures were half human and half animal. The Minotaur had the head of a bull and the body of a man. Heroes were the only people who could kill the monsters. Greek heroes were usually the children of gods and humans. Heracles was a son of Zeus. He fought the Hydra and many other creatures. Theseus was a hero who tracked the Minotaur through a maze and killed him. No one else had ever found their way out of the maze, but Theseus succeeded by following a thread through the twisting tunnels. And now let's wrap it up with talking about Greek myths in history. Ancient Greek writers like Euripides and Aeschylus turned some of the myths into great plays. Their plays influenced later writers. After the ancient Romans became the major power of Europe in the 1st century BC, they gave the Greek gods new names and borrowed their stories. Zeus, for example, became the Roman god Jupiter. Roman statues, paintings, and poetry all used stories from Greek myths. Later, European artists looked back to Greece for inspiration. Famous painters and sculptors created their own versions of the gods. Musicians and writers took ideas from Greek myths. Even today, you can find the ancient stories in movies and computer games. So that was about Greek myths. I hope you learned a couple of things about Greek myths. Of course, there is a lot more we can talk about, and we will. We will talk about Heracles or Hercules. We will talk about Achilles. We will talk about all those heroes and their stories in Greek myths. But for today, it's just a general overview of Greek myths. And now we will move on to talk about some of the key words we can find in this text. But before we do that, let me remind you that you can find a link in the description of this episode that will take you to our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. There you will find a custom post for this episode. In this post, you will find interactive activities. You will find a PDF practice worksheet you can download for free with its answer key, of course. Everything you need to practice the things you're learning here. If you're here just to listen and enjoy, you're more than welcome. And we're so honored that you picked our podcast. But if you want to take your English to the next level, you can take the link, go to our website, and use all the materials we've prepared for you to practice your English. And one more thing, if you like the content we're creating and you would like to support us to create more of that content, you can become our patron on Patreon. There's also a link to our Patreon page. Support English Plus Podcast, become a patron of the show on Patreon, and help us reach more people and create more episodes. And now, with that being said, let's talk about the key vocabulary that we would like to focus on in this episode. Let's start with the first word, ancient. When we said the ancient Greeks had many myths and stories about gods and heroes, what do we mean by ancient? Ancient means very old or having existed for a long time. That is the meaning of ancient. We're not talking about the Greeks about 100 years ago or 200 years ago. We're talking about the Greeks more than 2,000 years ago. Now, it is relative, of course. What is ancient in some contexts may be longer. We don't have a specific number like more than 200 years, it's ancient. It depends. But it means something that is very old. So if you consider something very old, you can call it ancient if you want. Anyway, that was the word ancient. Then we talked about the gods and we said that they fell in love and they quarreled. What is the meaning of quarrel? Now, a quarrel is an angry argument between two or more friends or family members. So if you quarrel with someone, you have this angry argument with this person. And that is quarrel. Now let's move on to talk about the next word, and that is when we said Kronos then tried to kill his own children by swallowing them. What is the meaning to swallow? If you swallow something, you cause it to go from your mouth down into your stomach. Like when we eat or drink, we swallow. And that might sound strange, but Kronos literally did it. Now, of course, this is just a myth, but in the myth, he swallowed his own children, except for Zeus, who came later, and we said he overcame Kronos. Now, what is the meaning of overcome? We use that usually with problems. And we can say that Kronos was a problem to Zeus because he was holding all Zeus's brothers and sisters in his belly. So that was a problem. If you overcome a problem or a feeling, you successfully deal with it and control it. And that's what happened. But here we can simply say that overcame Kronos like he beat Kronos. We can say that, but overcome, we can use it for problems. When you overcome a problem, you deal with the problem and you control it. And now for the next word, offend. And we used that when we talked about Poseidon. We said sailors had to be careful not to offend Poseidon. If angry, he might start a storm. What is the meaning of offend? If you offend someone, you say or do something rude which upsets or embarrasses them. And usually they will get angry because you did that, because you offended them. And in this case, in Greek myths, you wouldn't want to offend Poseidon. Look what happened to poor Odysseus. Because he offended Poseidon, it took him 10 years to get back home from the Trojan War. So that was offend. What about the next word, kidnap? And this is when we talked about Hades, who ruled the underworld, and we said that he kidnapped Persephone. What is the meaning of kidnap? To kidnap someone is to take them away illegally and by force, and usually to hold them prisoner in order to demand something from their family, employer, or government. Now, of course, here Hades kidnapped Persephone because he wanted her as his wife. It's a different purpose, but he kidnapped her forcefully. She didn't want to go with him. And her mother, of course, didn't want her to go with him as well. And since he couldn't get the blessing of her mother, and he was a powerful god, so he didn't need this blessing, he kidnapped her by force. And then we talked about starve, the word starve, because we said Demeter was too busy searching for her child to look after the harvest, people began to starve. What is the meaning of starve? If people starve, they suffer greatly from lack of food, which sometimes leads to their deaths. So it is a big problem. Starving is not just like being hungry. Being hungry, you feel hungry every day, but you don't starve unless there is a big problem. There's a big lack of food, food shortage or something, a famine or a problem like that, so people starve, which is a big problem. And now for the next word, basis. We said myths that have a basis in history are sometimes called legends. Now, the basis of something is its starting point or an important part of it from which it can be further developed, and that is the basis. Now, myths that have a basis, that have a starting point in history, they can be called legends. And this basis, by the way, is spelled B-A-S-I-S. But anyway, if you want to check the spelling of all the words, you can find this text on our website by following the link I left in the description. So if you want, you can go there and check any word you need. And now for the next word, declare. We said the Greeks declared war on Troy because Paris ran away with Helen, obviously. So what is the meaning of declare? Now, if you declare that something is true, you say that it is true in a firm, deliberate way. You can also declare an attitude or intention. And in this case, the intention is war. And that is to declare war on somebody or on something. And now for our next word, tale. Now, we said here Greek storytellers passed on the tales for hundreds of years before they were written down. The tale is simply a story, often involving magic or exciting events. This is what we call tales. And we have a lot of kinds of tales, but most of them are not realistic. Because if they're realistic, we would simply call them stories. We can say a real story. We never say real tale, right? And now for the last word for today's episode. And this is when we talked about their plays. We're talking about ancient Greek plays influenced later writers. What is the meaning of influence? If someone or something influences a person or situation, they have an effect on that person's behavior or on that situation. We can find that clear in works of art, in later plays, or in general later artworks in all kinds of art. They were heavily influenced by Greek myths, Greek plays, and Greek literature in general. Now, with that being said, that'll be all I wanted to share with you for today. I hope you learned a thing or two about Greek myths, and I hope you learned some useful words you can use in your own language. But I will have to remind you again and to insist, if you want to take your English to the next level, take the link you can find in the description and go to our website. You will find interactive activities and a PDF downloadable worksheet, whatever you prefer. And in the PDF downloadable worksheet, for example, I have deliberately added many exercises, not for you to do all of them, but to give you a variety of exercises so that you can pick the exercise you like the most and practice. All of that is available on our website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com, and all of that is available to you for free. So use this opportunity, take the link and go there and take your English to the next level. With that being said, I would like to thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. This is your host, Danny. I will see you next time.